Day session on the 26th of October 2025. We don't have very many of these left. We've got 4 that includes Kevin and others, and then I'm going to be very brave and do a live on my own, but it's a recap of all the videos that we've done this year because I've had such incredible people talking, including the guest today. So we've got Tim Scott from Kandanga Farm Store, so just outside of Gympie in Queensland. Good morning, Tim.
Morning, thanks for having us.
And we've got Neils Olsen, again, back for his second tirade of me interrogating him.
Yep, that's fine.
From Gippsland in Victoria. Welcome, Neils.
Good day.
And then, of course, my usual suspect, Kevin Elmy from, are you in Saskatchewan or Alberta this morning?
In Alberta.
Alberta. Okay, so he does live in Alberta, but he spends a lot of time in Saskatchewan as well. All right, welcome everybody, and all of you who are watching us live. Welcome to a session on multi-species, and we've got some amazing farmers here using multi-species, having a lot of success. And of course, you know Neils Olsen with the Soil Key Renovator, so he's got a little extra bit that he uses. But all of them are using or have used cattle or some form of livestock to help boost the whole multi-species process as well. Before we go into a conversation, I would just like to bring up my little language session, which is going to be profits. So if you joined us last week, I spoke about profit and sort of explained that there were 4 aspects to it. And today what I'm going to do is use the examples of where profit sits with the multi-species farming and what you're doing on your farm. So overall, your time will increase so that you have more available time to spend doing whatever you like. So it's free time with your family, but that's because you haven't had to spray your chemicals and you haven't really had to fertilize. You probably may have had to do some foliar spraying if you needed to, but the multi-species is really self-sufficient. It looks after itself. Then you've got your health, so your environment, personal health, ecosystem, soil and plant health all increase. And so does your quality of crop, whether you are using your actual crop, your plant or your livestock. Then you have the environment. So you know the old age saying is happy wife, happy life. Well, I'm going to flip it. So happy farmer equals happy family. And a happy family ends up being a happy farm, and the energy frequency will lift. So when you're in debt, when you're feeling depressed, when you're under that stress cortisol level, your frequency, your energy frequency actually drops. It is scientific, it has been proven. And so then what happens is you're opening yourselves to all the bad I was going to say insects, I'm talking about plants, bad parasites and things like that will attack you, or viruses, and then you're always feeling under the weather and not very well. So when your environment, and that means your family, your house, the environment that you're living in, not just the landscape, lifts the frequency, then everybody's functioning at a much healthier level. And then finally, you've got the money. So your profit margin will increase because you have a bet every which way, which is a Martin Williams saying. And so instead of just planting a monoculture that can be taken out by one pest, you've got multiple species of plants that kind of look after each other. So below ground and above ground. And because they're all functioning at a higher frequency, a higher level of health, they're less likely to have pest attack. So of course, then you spend less money killing on the chemicals and the fertilizers, killing pests and things like that. And just something that I observed with Darren Mudford on his farm, he goes, I plant, the multi-species crop is planted first and it's harvested last. And then the bit in between, he does nothing. Whereas with the monocultures that he's got on his farm, he's actually having to tend to them all the way through the growing season. So just a little bit of a story there for you. So that's all the profit, and we'll just keep linking it back to that with these lovely farmers that we've got today. So this is the bit I haven't practiced. Who would like to go first? Maybe, I don't know, maybe Kevin, would you like to just start anywhere? Sorry, guys, I haven't prepared this bit.
There was a bit of a scrambled drill for you this morning. So, yeah, no, this is that whole thing. When you look at what nature does, nature doesn't do monocultures. Nature doesn't have a lot of the chemicals that they use. It's a beautiful symbiotic relationship. And I just did up an article this morning, just going through and talking about dealing with symptoms versus dealing with causes with problems. And this whole thing, when we have more and more of these problems, when we're doing multi-species farming, uh, it's we're taking more natural route to the whole system. And one of the things when people talk about multi-species, they say, oh yeah, we have good diverse mix, we have oats, barley, triticale, and no, that's the same functional plant group. We need the different functional plant groups to make this whole thing work. And that's where these other two gentlemen, they're banging it out. They're living it. So,
Tim, what are you doing on your farm? Because you've got K2 beef and Kandanga Farm Store.
Yeah, we've got a sort of unique little model where we are farmers, and then we use our findings, I guess, to try and get the best products to supply into the regenerative and organic markets. We don't sell any synthetics or chemicals through the shop, and we don't use any on the farms. I think the link between diversity of diet in animals is probably the easiest thing to see. The dry matter yield you get from multi-species, but the stuff you can't see is the most important bit. But when you're actually in a process of trying to sell these ideas to people, they all want something that's immediately measurable and something that everyone can see. So, I think the ultimate multi-species crop is weeds, and it's a bit harder to sell weed species, especially when you've got. But on our own farm, I don't care. I don't care if it's a diversity and a diversity of plants that has come from nature, the complexity of nature, sort of getting a reboot and being allowed to express itself, or whether it's something we've planted. But regardless, we've got to address the soil, which will take care of everything else. But it's just a bit harder to explain to neighbours why you're letting weeds grow than what it is. If you plant something that's a multi-species, that they can sort of look over the fence and go, oh, that's what they're doing. So, but yeah, I do think there's a thing about nutrient density of food, and you can only get, that work of Dan Kittredge's that's come out in the last couple of years has all been about the only real link between nutrient density and food and is the soil health, and that's, you can work in whatever climatic zone, whatever type of animals, type of plants, just 15 different crops. When it comes down to it, if you're measuring micronutrients in food, that's a direct result of diversity of microbes in the soil. So what's the best way to do that? Let weeds grow or plant multi-species, but definitely moving away from monoculture of anything. As Kevin said, it doesn't happen in nature. And so, why would we think that it's going to work well when we're trying to, have our little human impact on the world for the few years that we sort of are there to impact.
I love the fact that you've mentioned it straight up, Tim, because funnily enough, when he sent me this photo, he goes, it's not technically multi-species, but it is. It's a load of weeds. So again, it's about freeing up our thought process with regards to the fact that we have to plant multi-species when actually nature is providing them free of charge for herself, for you from herself. And of course, she knows better than we do as to what she actually needs. Moving to Neils with the extra bit that you've added of the Soil Key Renovator.
Yes, it follows the natural system. It enhances the natural system by sheet composting some of the green matter and stubble back into soil rapidly by covering up the undisturbed portion of where we're planting seeds with a dust coating. Now, initially at times, its soil's not really that favourable to it if it's
hard, compacted and heavy clay, it'll crumble up and you don't sort of get enough dust to create the full effect. But the quickest way to create that is start doing it and do it a few times, and then you end up with that result. Now, it's diversity of plants gives you that combination, but the diversity of soil structure gives you another extra combination as well. And the diversity of the food sources provided to your life in the soil. So it's, if you're running a system, you need to feed it. So once you've got your food sources fed, the plants will then cycle the nutrients and improve, and then they'll self-improve all the time. But you've got to get it to that point first. You've got to get your 20% air in your soil structure, and you've got to get your efficiency of photosynthesis up on the plants. Now, where we've been trying it right down to like 450 millimetre rainfall, even lower in a few instances, depending on the seasonal conditions after planting, or depending on where the soil's starting. Now, if there's not much life in the soil, not much activity, not much available nutrient, it takes a little while to get there. And that's where there's little bits and pieces that you can add to start that off. But the end goal, and we've probably been there 5 or 6 years now, is having the soil functioning and improving the nutrient cycling by the increase in photosynthesis. So you've got your sugars coming out of the plant root systems, feeding the fungal population, creating self-aggregating soil. So then once you've created that, you've actually got the home for the free-living bacteria to pick up nitrogen directly from the air. Like your legumes are great, but you have to get it to this point where the structure is there for the home for the free-living bacteria. Then you've got access to all that carbon in the air, and that really gets converted into the soil profile very, very quickly once you've created that structure. And 97% of what you're doing is air, water and sunlight. So maximising the use of air, water and sunlight seems to be some of the testing we've got coming up. The data's coming out very shortly. Like a week ago, they did testing up at Kilmore, and they had 2 millimetres in the control soak into a sort of infiltration ring, 2 millimetres in 1 hour, yet they put 20 litres in where soil key had been for 3.5 years. So the sponge created is just phenomenal. So and the chemistry is starting to get worked out as well, but the actual soil sucks it in. So once you've got that actual free-forming aggregation, it actually sucks the water into the soil profile. And when it's 400 or 500 mil deep, it's just a big sponge under there. So they're the sort of things we're putting data together now on independent research on farms that have been doing this system for 3.5 years now in a fairly dry climate. And the virtually definition of the land in that area is degraded farmland. So it's virtually unprofitable to farm now. And they've turned it right around in 3.5 years. So, yeah.
So Niels, the difference between using the soil key renovator and a mixed species and just planting a mixed species, the soil key seems to be hyperdriving it somehow. Is that correct?
Yes, it helps create the food source. So multi-species with variety gives you a start on that, but I suppose the measuring stick of how well you're going is how much carbon you're actually building in the profile and how much dry matter you're taking off or fodder you're bringing off. So we're like on our farm, we're doing like 2 to 2.5 tonne of carbon per hectare per year in the top meter, which and having beef production coming off that as well. So there is places around that are still nowhere near the 2.5 tonne, but they're not taking any production off. They're putting everything back in, and they're loading heaps of stuff back in to try and create that. It's you put lots in, you get lots, but we're not putting anything in apart from a bit of seed and running beef and getting 2.5 tonnes. So that's the measure of things are working well. You're actually getting carbon building rapidly and continuing on. Like we're up to 10 years now. So
I think another measure is I just went to Neil. I did go to Neils's place. It was 2000, I think. But the thing that hit home to me on that visit, and it's probably the reason we pushed so hard into the cover crop since, is all these fence lines were too short. What's happened here? And it's actually the soil's built up, and seeing that on a property is, that's you talk about carbon percentages all you like, but people can't see it. When you start to have short, low fences, that's when you start to realise something's happened.
Yep. And like we started off with a nice brown sort of 70, 80 millimetres of topsoil over the property, and now there's a really good 300, 350 in 10 years. So, and then there is initially there was like a yellow light coloured clay down to 1 metre, and now we've got brown patches and greying patches right down into that clay, 800, 900 mil. And we've actually got, like, you would not have seen a worm below about 150 millimetres for 35 years I was on the farm. Now we've got worms down 800 mil. And virtually every core sample we take on a carbon test around the property now is half a worm. There's worms everywhere. So they're working for you. So, you're capturing that sunlight and utilising the water. Now, the utilisation of the water, and this is where like Hamish Hunt and Phil Mulvey have actually really taught us a lot on how the water can actually, there's lots of different functions in how water works, and the soil, there's lots of different functions on how they work. And you've got to get the two combined so that when it actually rains, it goes in and it's held for photosynthesis for the plant, not just wicked up to the surface and evaporated off. Like there's this big in regenerative ag or organic, keep ground cover. Yes, because the reflection of the heat comes off the green leaf, so you don't get heat on your grass field. There's no heat because it's reflected. Where if you haven't got any green, that heat, the UV radiation actually heats the soil, and like cook an egg on your soil. So that heat causes a heap of evaporation. Farmers haven't really been taught that the green reflects the heat, and you've got to keep that always covered, but then you've got to hold the water in. They haven't been taught that you've got to have a good fungal population, and you've got to feed that fungi to keep it there, maintain it. So the more you build it up, the easier it is to build it up next time. So like we were starting at around that, like just your biometer test would be around sort of 450, 500 kilograms per hectare in the top 10 centimetres, and now we're up to 2,000. So once you've built it 4 times the microbial activity, you've got a lot better function, and you need diversity. You've got to have diversity because it's the same in your gut. There is a few microbes in your gut and bacteria that sort the others out. You don't want to be having a whole heap of one sort of bacteria because the conditions suit that one bacteria. You're only getting that one nutrient cycle, so that restricts your photosynthesis. You don't get the sugars coming out of your root system, then you can't build your soil structure. So that's where the diversity of the sheet composting effect of soil key and the conditions that it creates when it goes through, this from sort of fairly disturbed soil, where the blades have gone through and created the competition-free seed bed. Then there's a lightly lifted bit beside that. Now that lightly lifted bit beside that, not always there when you first start. When you're putting blades into concrete, really hard soil, it doesn't really fluff up beside it. Once you've done it a few times and you're fluffing up beside it, here you've got another whole zone in your soil for a different home for different microbes that are needed to balance the whole system. So you need the undisturbed, slightly disturbed, and a fair bit disturbed. And then the food sources are from chopped up plants, from stubble, from actual plant material that's been mulched and put down underneath the dust coating, and plant material that's still attached to the plant, that's covered up as well. So you've got all these multiple food sources which help create that balance. So that's like the patented system of soil key that's actually getting that extra result. Takes time, but it's depending where you start and what nutrients available and what you can grow. And then it doesn't have to be what you plant. It can be weeds or whatever. It's if you're growing something, that's a good thing. It's got to be green and growing. It's good. That's all you need.
And in multi-layers too, that multi-layers of green leaf cover, in our area, you talked a lot about moisture in the soil, but green leaf creates moisture. So we're up to over 100 mil a year of dew now in our country that's got green leaf cover on it.
Yes.
It's just, when you go through university, you do your normal ag science type training, it's the opposite. You're taught to exterminate everything that's green because it's taking your moisture away. That they don't count that it's actually putting a fair bit back. And if you're in a 400 mil rainfall and you're getting 100 mil back,
that's right. And you're keeping the fungal population alive in the surface to hang on to it, because if you spray it all out and you kill your fungi, any rain that comes after that's going to evaporate straight back out in 2 or 3 days. So the mindfulness of maintaining your activity and having the method applied to your farming system that's a long-term help, not a short-term blanket approach for a measured gain in science for a narrow view. Once you look at the whole picture, you need that fungi to hold the moisture. You're restricting your growth for 2 or 3 weeks just because you've sprayed out your paddock. So you can do that for 20 years. You've restricted 6 weeks of growth just because you've lost the fungal population. That extends your plant's ability to gather the moisture as it dries off into the season. So if you haven't got that population that'll go get the extra moisture than what the root systems can get, all your plants on your farm are shutting down before everyone else's. And that's what's happening in Kilmore up at the moment, like the just lush green pasture in the summer. Like, okay, it's not 600 mil high, it's only short, but it's brown and dust beside it. So once you've got the ability to hang on and grow something with it, you've got the benefit. And it's not so much in peak season you'll get a extra growth. It's more when you're getting to that sort of early start, quick start, or that later growth into the dry period. That's where you get your extra, and it's hard to get it any other way. You've got to have good soil function, good moisture holding ability to get that extension. And that's farming has been looking on yield for that instant yield, but then they'll pump their paddock up to get a heap of hay and silage, and then it grows nothing for 6 months, and they've got to feed it all back out. Where if they looked after their soil structure, they would grow quite good for a lot longer and wouldn't need the hay and silage. So it's a little bit, the more you push things, the more it restricts it when conditions get tough. And that's when it costs farmers, when it's tough for everyone, the price of the fodder goes up, and you make a huge debt for those couple of years, and takes a couple of years of profit to get back to square one again. Where if you just, edge your way through and have a bit better season every year, you're better off without the stress. So that's the approach that we're trying to explain. And now we've got research showing, like on a few big dairy farms that have been 4 years under the soil key system. So it's soil key and seed only, no other inputs. And like the increases are between sort of 18-20% up to 200% increase in profit on the soil key system. So that's a big turnaround in our dairy industry. But they had a huge bank of fertiliser that they've been putting on for 30-40 years, stuck in that soil, compacted soil, could not put their pigtail posts in the ground anymore. Like, it was just that compacted. And you free it all up and it just explodes. Like, it's just phenomenal. And even in their lighter sandy country, it's turned around in 18 months. Like, they've just blown away. So we're looking at running a few field days out around those farms in the next 6 months or so.
So yeah, Kevin, when you're here, in March next year. Our last conference will be at Mornington Peninsula. And how many hours are you from there, Niels?
About an hour and a quarter. So come up and have a look at the farm.
Yeah, I'd love you to actually, you two get together on Neils Olsen's farm. I think everybody who's into farming needs to visit Neil's farm. I did, was it last year? And I always wanted to see it because I'd heard so much about it. And it's seeing is believing, and it's amazing.
Yeah, and like ours is beef, but we'll take you up like on the way from the peninsula. There's a couple of big dairy farms that are run you past them as well. Have a look over them because very impressive. So yeah.
Kevin, where should we start with you? Because we've got a fair few photos. So let's move on to blending, I think. Can you hear me?
Yes, can.
No. Oh, good. You.
Yeah, oh, good. So yeah, the blending part, there's so many ways of getting it done. There's one of our people I would work with. They bought an old cement truck, took the cement truck part off and used that. This is with Imperial Seeds. This is their blender. It's a vertical mixer, so that this way it has a little elevator leg beside it that you put the seed in there. So this way it's all weighed out. Put it in there and it slowly turns, mixes it up, and then they can bag off of that. There's on our farm, I was using the black seed boxes, and I would have two of them. I would load the one up, lift it up over the other one, pull the chute, and it would fall down into the second one. Do that a couple times, and boom, it was mixed. So it doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be really elaborate or cost a lot of money, but there's the seed box with me bagging up seed. It was relatively simple, easy to clean out. Just count the bags going in and move from one seed box to the other, and then into the bags. Done, ready to go seed. And you'll find out, the more diversity you have, the more different bags you have, the more hectares you're going to be doing, you're going to modify it. And it may be something where just a cement mixer is going to be, just a small one is going to work. It's going to go back to what do you have, how fast do you need it, how many hectares, how many bags, but it all works. And it doesn't have to be perfect of a mixing job. It's always nice to have uniformity in the mix. I know I've talked to some producers that they didn't have a mix done up at a professional mixer. That's what they do. And by the time they got the batch home, all the light stuff had settled to the top and the heavy stuff was on the bottom. And so when they were seeding all the sunflowers, for instance, they came out on one side of the field and they didn't show up on the other. And they were a little disturbed about that. And I said, in the big picture, that's still diversity, as long as it wasn't just pure sunflowers. But it's still going to work, because just remember, next time if you do the same thing, start on the other side of the paddock, so that maybe the sunflowers will be on the other side of the paddock next year, or do smaller bags, or there's so many different ways around it.
Can I just ask, with this blend, it says perennial rye, but there doesn't seem to be any rye in it. So is that for specifically oversowing onto perennial rye pasture?
That mix right there is this mix right behind me in my screen.
Oh.
So I used this as my nurse cover crop for seeding a perennial ryegrass seed field. So underneath this mess that you see is the perennial ryegrass that's growing very happily. And so it was foundation seed that I got, so it was for pedigreed. And so that was separate bags that I received.
So it's a myth then that ryegrass strangles everything?
Now, when the thing that drove me crazy was the wrong word, but pretty close. When I was in Australia, people are saying ryegrass, oh, bad. And I said, okay, was it annual, or is it biennial, or perennial? And everybody that I've talked to said, I don't know. It's always there, and it's a bad weed, and it's hard to kill. And I kept saying, okay, is it vegetative all year, and then the next year goes to seed? or what is the growth habit, and everybody's so mad at it they're trying to kill it. In my further research, I found that the annual ryegrass, and annual ryegrass in Canada can be a bad weed too. We don't use a lot of it, but it's very waxy, very hard to kill. It goes to seed very quickly in one season. I'm assuming in Australia, you might even get 3 or 4 seed crops off of it in 1 year. So I'm thinking that is what you're looking for. Whereas when we start dealing with the forage types, when we're dealing with the Italian ryegrass, the perennial ryegrass, those ones are going to be less problematic in your system. And so once again, being, coming into a certain area, this is what we do. No, don't want ryegrass. What is a sideways substitution that we can use instead of ryegrass? Oh, we can use this. We can use teff grass. We can absolutely. And this is when we start talking about these multi-species blends that we do. One of the questions I ask is, what weeds do you have? Because when we have dandelion, when we have wild oats, when we have those type of weeds, that's telling me what's happening or what's not happening in that soil. So that what we want to do is, when we have dandelion, what plants will replace the ecological function of that weed with something that we can benefit from. And so in this case, when we look at what dandelion will do to the soil, capeweed would be similar, is when we can replace it with plantain and chicory. When we have wild oats, they're nitrate accumulators. They're a very low fungal bacteria ratio plant that grows in the soil. What can we put in there to replace that? And that's where using some of these biennial grasses, it ties up that free nitrate. If we can keep it low growing, that grass low growing, so it's vegetative, the protein gets too high in that plant. It says, why do I have so much protein? So it soaks up the nitrate, converts it over to complex nitrogen sources, re-releases that into the soil as root exudate. The weeds can't feed off of it, but our plants can. Our microbes can. And this is where, with the soil key, the great thing with it, and once again, if you're going into follow low carbon soils with a low carbon crop growing across it, and you're thinking it's going to fix it in 1 year, no, the whole thing that Niels is doing is he's producing that carbon to go be returned back in the soil, produce that mulch to get that composting system going. We are going to add plants that are going to be stimulated by that. And that's that whole system of making this thing work. So this is a picture from our buddy Paul Carnuglian up at Birch Hills, Saskatchewan. He's one of the dairies that jumped on this regen ag thing, and like you said, the profitability is completely changed on the farm for the better. And so the whole thing is number one, keeping that armor on, and having this diverse plant growth. And the other thing I've been telling them is, it was 8 years, no manure on the home field because it was just throwing the whole chemistry out of balance. So we've got his fungal bacteria ratio back into a happier spot. We have the living roots, we have the plant diversity, and like I said, the soil's functioning, the plants are functioning, and now the animals are their nutritionists that they're working with can't believe how much production they're getting out of it with so little starch. Because we're, once again, nutrition wise, we are led to believe that where we get the energy is out of starch, whereas if we get these water soluble carbohydrates going and get those into the rumen performs way more efficiently. I keep asking the cattle producers, how many, like when you are butchering an animal, when you're gutting them, how many gizzards do you see in a cow? They're not designed to eat grain. They're designed to take roughage, this green material, put it through the rumen, and convert it to energy, produce beef or milk or wool. Or that's the system that we're in. And that's, once again, these our training. we need to be kind of reprogramming ourselves, and that's that whole idea of next March, going through and deprogramming, reprogramming, and moving forward.
Tim,
Yeah.
I'll move to you now because while we're on the subject of grazing, let me just bring up a photo for you. You're using, I'm just presuming sun hemp. They do graze sun hemp, is that correct?
Oh yeah, smash it. And it also tillers quite well. So if you hit it early, and then we were getting 4 to 5 grazings off those paddocks that had, it's in the mix, but something in it. And I have heard people say they don't eat it, but I don't know. It looks like they're eating it.
I'm only asking because I have grown it, but I haven't grazed it yet. And I know my horse, because I've got horses rather than other livestock, and they just smash those. They're the same as cattle, really, even though they're not ruminants. They love the sunflowers, they love the millet, they love all of those other species. But I haven't tried them with sun hemp yet.
Amazingly, humans are the only species left on the planet that don't know what we should be eating. And if animals have got a range of things to eat, they work it out without dying. Some sheep excluded, but generally humans have a distorted taste pattern once they become older from eating so much, from eating sugar-based diets and high carbohydrate, I suppose, processed food. But animals, that's the whole thing behind free choice mineral feeding, that they work out what they need, and unless they're starving, they're not going to eat things they shouldn't. So if they've got the choice there, and they're used rotated in high density grazing and long recovery periods and all the normal things you do when you've got a proper grazing system, then they work out what they should be eating. And there's so many, it's amazing moving animals into a new paddock, whether it be planted out or not, the things they take a bite of first that are supposed to be on the noxious weeds list, just because they're chasing a particular mineral or something that is mining. I mean, we're in Northern Australia and coastal areas, so we can get tremendous growth rates from systems at work, and we can see the results of systems quickly. And I mean, perennial systems are always going to be cheaper. And when you do, training organisations around, it's all about it's all about trying to reduce your costs. And I suppose that's the thing we've focused on, is planting systems and feeding systems that are low cost.
Okay, Tim. You can tell him to shut up if you want.
Yeah. So I suppose that's the difference between Northern Australia and possibly a lot of those southern areas is we've got bigger areas, generally speaking, and I want to come up with systems that are scalable across tens and hundreds of thousands of acres. And so, whether that be planting in bands and doing safe to fail trials, I guess, to start, we want to use animals in conjunction and have, I don't have expensive planting gear. I don't actually know really of any of our customers that have got expensive planting gear. And as much as I would bloody love one of those machines of Neils, I will probably never buy one because I don't, the scale of things that we have to do it at, I don't have the economics to back that up. And I want to prove to people that we can do things on a big scale. So I guess Neils is at the pointy end and showing what can actually be achieved. We're at the other end where we're just going, what can you do with the minimum and see what results you can get from that. And we've had, there's quite a good trial on our website. That's a local farmer, full conventional guy who the DPI up here is running trials using our cover crop mix and has been for 3 or 4 years versus single species plantings. And this guy's done a farmer-based trial. It's not peer-reviewed, it's nothing like that, but he has bothered to write it up. And he has done soil microbiome testing, which isn't all that accurate really, but it gives you some indication. But he's shown in his monoculture planting, which he's been doing every year for the last 20 years, and with conventional synthetic fertilizers, he's got 15% fungi in his soil and 85% bacteria. And in 1 year or in one planting, he's completely switched that. Some of the trials, they're all showing at least 50-50 once he's done one planting of cover crop without synthetics. But it's also up to 85%, 15%, switched it completely the opposite way around. So I guess I'm looking for low-hanging fruit and things that we can promote to the other 95%. like all the guys, we drive out west and we look at oats crops and sorghum crops as far as the eye can see for forage. And I'm going, imagine if these guys would just try to add in, half a dozen extra species, or ideally put in 10. It doesn't cost you any more. And just one little change, or change their grazing just a little bit to allow other stuff to come through. So, Australia is a massive place like Canada, but we have probably a way bigger upside. I don't know, I haven't been to Canada, but we have got a big upside here if we can get Northern Australia pumping. And at the moment, it's all these things are seen as weird out there stuff, but actually this is normal. The weird out there stuff is planting a monoculture and expecting it to put up with the climatic conditions we have in Northern Australia and fluke a crop every now and again using massive amount of inputs, which we don't need.
So
anyway,
knowing the climate, Tim, that you live in, because I live in very similar, obviously I sway towards the summer species mix. Do you do a winter species as well?
Yeah, and I push actually winter over summer really in our systems, because we've got so much summer active pasture that the figures on your returns per head if you're grazing, or returns per hectare if you're looking at dry matter yield, winter's not much going on, so there's not as much competition. But summer, we've already got a lot growing, and our difference in carrying capacity winter to summer is probably realistically it's probably triple in the summer as what it is in the winter. So we're looking to fill feed gaps as well. So that's, I guess, just another little benefit of chucking in a multi-species winter crop. Is not only got less competition, so it often does better, but it also fills that feed gap when we need it.
And Neil, you have organised or spoken to AGF Seeds for, I don't know how many years ago it was, and they've created a summer and a winter blend for the soil key as well, haven't they?
Yeah, because our requirement is to have all bare seeds, no coatings, no insecticides or fungicides on our seeds. So that took them a little while to get those seeds, and we're a fair few truckloads a year of that going out now. So the blend is a fairly broad blend covering all conditions and all fertility sort of requirements as well. And like we've had quite a few farmers that will be year 2 and 3 in, and look, we haven't seen any of much of the brassicas in the first couple of years, and why we got to have them in the mix, and it's like $6 in the mix a hectare, and they go, we don't need that. And well, it's in the mix, we can't take it out, but it'll cost you more to get a special mix made up than just have the $6 in there. And okay, well, they plant the same thing again, and that season conditions, the whole farm's nearly covered in brassicas. So like it's sort of it covers the different conditions, different fertility, because like the measurements in our fertility, like the fertility 3 times through with soil key, in like an independent trial back in 2017, their actual virtually every available nutrient in the soil profile had doubled in availability without applying anything. So things are changing that much year on year that the seed mix depicts what's going on your farm. You always find out of the 22 or 3 or 4 or 5 seeds that are in the mix, you'll have 10 or 12 of them going really well, and the others you might not see that much, and the pests might take a couple out, and then there might be a dry season, so they go really well. But there's enough variation in there that there's early fibre coming on, and enough legumes to help kickstart that nitrogen fixing, and a few herbs for the health and getting some extra minerals up, and some tillage radish and stuff like that to bring some stuff up down deep. And it seems to change and evolve over, we're still 10 years in now, and it's still changing and evolving, but it's more consistent. The last 4 or 5 years, it's been more consistent what's growing. And the root systems that are getting down deep in the profile now, we're 4 times from what we saw year 2 or 3 to what we see year 10. There's 4 times as much roots down 800 mil. So there was 1 or 2 in a like a 40 millimeter round core. You'd have 1 or 2 sort of roots in there. Well, now we've got 6 or 7, or even 20 in some cases, depending on what that chemistry is and how much it's breaking down. But Phil Mulvey, that's been really watching over us the last couple of years, has been digging a lot of deep holes around the farm, and he's actually got a lot of respect now for the soil key system, because he's been watching it for 2 years and seen the change at depth. And he goes, how can this be happening? Because it takes a lot of sunlight capture and to sugars to go down to change those tons of soil into a functioning soil profile down there. And he's just blown away.
So your seed mixes you came up with, sorry, Tim, I just got this one question. The seed mixes that you came up with 10 years ago, are you still using the same mixes, even though that you're
very similar? Yeah, they're very similar. Yeah. Well, there's perennials and annuals in the mix, and some herbs. But the main thing is having a bit of everything to cover all conditions. It seems to be the option, and they'll get farmers in the dairy situation. They've been planting a few extra sunflowers and stuff like that, because they high fertility and grow quite well, and they're putting a bit of sorghum and a bit of maize in as well on the high fertility areas. It seems to be helping. We haven't tested and seen, but the production wise, from a milk point of view, seems to be very good. So yield wise, probably not a real lot different that we can measure at this stage, but it's evolving as it goes. And you can, it's like when I first started, the whole purpose was putting maize into pasture, and it was 6-8 inches high for the first time trying to grow maize into pasture. It was just overcrowded. Then I got the soil key, and that got it to about 500 or 600 mil high, when now it's like we're 2 meters high. So it's like, once the nutrient cycling's there to feed those type of plants, away it goes. But if the competition's too much and you haven't got the nutrient available, those plants are really restricted. So as you try a few different things as your soil improves, but people turn up to your farm and they go, well, I want to do that too, and they go home with it and they try and do it. Until the soil's there, in a good rainfall, good fertility, yes, you go pretty close to it quickly, but you've got to get the microbes up. You've got to have the food source to feed the plants. You have the food source to feed the microbes happening. Or ideal conditions, it's easy to do, but it might only be ideal conditions in most places in Australia for 8 weeks. So you need to extend it out to 16, 20 weeks, and then you can get the whole plant to do its whole job. So that's the aim, where it's sort of a forgotten focus. They all try and do it quick and store it, then feed it back out, where if you can grow it for longer and have that stored feed on the paddock. So like we're getting to like a December period now. We've got like 4 months of feed in reserve standing on the property. So we go through our 2 months dry period with 4 months of feed at the start. So it's very comforting to have that feed standing. And we're testing the feed, and we might end up with 30% of that feed going too fibrous and too stalky and losing its sugars. But then there's good bottom plantain and a few clovers that are really good in the bottom. So the piece that the cows actually graze when it's 4 months old standing is still quite good for milk and beef production. But there's a bit of stalkier stuff left behind. Well, then we mulch that in and plant in our autumn planting, and those stalks is fantastic for warming up the soil over the winter months. So we're not, like you might think it's wasteful, but it's actually a food source for the winter months to warm it up, and it's the cheapest way to do that as well. So it's just a win-win benefit. So you try and do that to half your farm a year. That really gives you a good boost into the winter period, because you've warmed your soil up. And like we've measured, it's 1.5 to 2.5 degrees warmer compared to control, just from that vibrant soil function, keeping that soil warm and breathing over the winter period. Because as soon as it gets quite wet anaerobic, the soil cools down straight away. But if it's a sponge, it's cool, but it stays warm into the winter and keeps things growing. So that's our main sort of focus on trying to enhance and stretch that out. Yeah.
Go for it, Tim.
Oh, you touched on about the coating of seeds. Just with the cooling in winter, we've got the opposite thing with summer. It gets so bloody hot, and it can be a 40-degree difference between an area that's under multiple layers of green leaf cover versus an area that's not. 40 degrees kills a lot of microbes. Once we get up that 60 degrees, it just wipes things.
Yep.
We work with AGF2 on seed mixes, probably because we went around most of the different suppliers, and not many of them like selling bare seed, especially when you start getting the germination tested, good seed and proper mixing gear. But it's not in the business model of a lot of seed companies to sell uncoated seed, because clay is a lot cheaper to produce than what actual seed is. So that's the important thing. If you're going to plant it, you need to compare apples with apples and work out how much clay you're paying for in those coatings versus and insecticides and things. I mean, this is a different deal. It's not like you got one shot at it. You've got a dozen shots at it. You can't, if a beetle gets in there and eats some of, gets a taste for a certain type of seed, there's still 11 others there that it's going to. So the insecticide coatings and those, we're a certified organic grass-fed system anyway in our farm, but even if we weren't, I don't think we'd be using coated seed, in this sort of thing. The coatings obviously are needed in some fluffier seeds that they put through seeders, if they not going to pass through them easily, but most of these are hard seeds, all the annual stuff, and I don't see any reason why you would ever use a coated seed again, but finding a company to do that is difficult, and that's what AGF have been pretty good to deal with.
Yeah, no, they've been very good.
Kevin, do you want to go through some of your seed mixes?
Oh, well, that's where one of the reasons why I partnered with Imperial Seeds is because of the fact that they're willing to do a lot of the custom blending for us. And so we'll do, the smaller blends, but it takes some logistics and time moving it around. But it's more the lines of finding out what the goals are, the production, where are you on that soil succession ladder, and what are we trying to do with it? So when we are trying to kickstart the system, so this picture right here is actually done over at Dunedoo. So it was a blend that they did. So there's some millets, there's some mung beans, azuki beans, some sunflowers. Went with the good, we're clicking off the functional plant groups. What was the goal? Producing feed. So when we start talking, once again, reflecting back to what weeds are, okay, so now we'll design the blends to address the soil function needs. And so we do have the pre-designed blends that people can use. We can do the custom blends, or if the drive there is to have their own blend, bring in individual bags, and it's not rocket science. So one of the things that we will be going through, once again, the conference, is I've developed a spreadsheet to help design blends to get the proper seeds per square meter. And so this way we can go through and what expression do we want to have a legume mix? I found out that this buckwheat mix with millet, way too high on the buckwheat for what my goals were. If you're looking for weed suppression, what a great fast cool season mix to have to suppress weeds and kickstart that whole system to get that carbon into that soil. So it's really going through setting goals and deciding what we want to do, and just we have this ship, what direction we're going to point it. And so when we're going through, are we going to be grazing it? Are we going to be silaging it? Are we going to be, stockpiling it? What are we going to do? And that, with Neil said about the fact that some of the plants get a little too mature, it's really key to go in and have this diversity of putting in these super late species. So in Western Canada, we normally have about somewhere between 90 and 110 frost-free days. We're growing species that will mature in 130, 150 days, as long as they're not daylight sensitive. So anytime we've tried growing sun hemp in Western Canada, it gets about 30 centimeters high and goes to flower, and that's all we get out of it because of our latitude. So these are once again the sideways species. So if we can't use the sun hemp, what is a sideways move we can use? So is it cowpeas? Is it using some foraged soybeans? What do we have at our disposal? And now with that spreadsheet, we can put, okay, so what is the cost per kilo? How many seeds per kilo do we have? Plunk that into our spreadsheet and do the economics on it before we even get it blended up. So now we can look at those economics, and just like Neil said, when we are putting in, that the $6 per hectare of brassicas. Well, no, we don't want it. Well, some years you need it. In this mix, there's the maize we put into this mix, and exactly, we have this mix. It's a really thick mix. The maize got 1.5 to 2 meters tall, and people were looking at it and saying, "Why do you have it?" And I told them, "Well, go pull that plant out and bring it over down, and I'll show you." So he's a big rough and tumble rancher. He grabs the plant halfway up, didn't budge. He grabbed lower, pulled, didn't budge. He grabbed lower, pulled, and he looked at me and said, "Oh, that's why. It's a massive, coarse root system." And there was no way, unless he got his ute over it and a chain, that he's going to pull that maize plant out. And what that does to the soil, because we have a different microbiome, we have different root exudates, it's growing at a different time of the year as compared to everything else. That's just more diversity. And so if I was producing feed, 1 kilo per hectare of maize in a mix, it doesn't do anything to expense. And once again, we use non-GMO corn. And you'll like this, because you look at with Imperial, you don't see any pink stuff in it. You don't see any coatings. You don't see, and that's the other thing, that when we go through in that spreadsheet, we can put in, if we can get the amount of coating that's on it, we can put the coating in, the cost per kilo, and then the bare seed and the cost per kilo, figure out how many seeds per square meter we're getting, and then that reflects back to the dollars per hectare. And so is that clay coating on it, is it doubling our cost? Is it the same cost? Is it, what's going on with that cost? So it's cheaper per kilo to have that clay because it's clay and it's cheap. But how much coating's on it? What is that doing to our bottom line? And once again, the profit word.
Yeah, there's a big disconnect between profit and yield. I think a lot of people think they're doing well, and especially as input prices change, that's not the equation you're looking at. You're looking at what actually goes back into your bank account at the end of the day. And I think that's
Dr. Chris Nichols says the first thing we need to take out of agriculture, according to Dr. Chris Nichols, is the word yield. Profit is what we need to be talking about. And it's, what does this blend, what does it do to my rotation? What does it do for my nutrition? What does it do for my animals? What does it do setting up for that next crop? And that's the reason why this blend in behind me here on my screen, my whole goal with this blend was to produce enough nitrogen to grow that Italian, or the perennial ryegrass crop, without buying any synthetic nitrogen. And it did it. And in this case, the blend that's up on the screen, it's a high grass mix. What does that mean? It's biomass. You look at this one, you see some sandfoin, you see some maize, you see some Italian ryegrass, you see some, it's a brassica of some sort, so I'm thinking maybe a turnip. That has a different goal of where it's going. And these are the things that, once you understand what these mixes can do and how we design them and what projected outcomes we can get out of it, now we start moving forward really quickly. And so we can do it with a 22 species mix. We can do it faster with more of a concentrated type of mix.
Is that safflower similar to safflower?
Oh, safflower. I said safflower, but mental.
Oh, I was
safflower.
right then, because I went, that looks like safflower. Yes. Okay. Woo!
So you're gonna have to go back, rewind. Just when I say sainfoin, just throw
Cut it out.
safflower in. And
I hate to tell you this though, Kevin, it's live. Okay. But are they similar in appearance though?
It's the safflower is part of the sunflower family.
Okay.
Where I see it's offered in Australia through some of the retails, and it only grows knee to mid thigh high. Very drought tolerant, has a stronger taproot than the sunflower. It uses less water, a little more salt tolerant, and but looks looks like a white sunflower. In the seed. When you look at what the stem is, it's a wiry stem, so more like linseed, not as fibrous as linseed, but it's something where it creates longer armor, it has a little more lignin in it than what sunflowers or any other species will have.
Okay, good to know. And then what's this funny seed? Is that a clover seed? One that looks like a little grub.
Oh, I would have to. I don't have it on full screen. Let me. Oh, that is. That's a good question. This is something I use a lot of. That one, you see, there's egg on my face. I don't use a lot of it, and that one.
I've never seen it before.
Yeah. Good question. There's someone, if someone's watching, they can put it in the comments.
Yeah, does anybody know that funny little... It reminds me of the woodland.
It might be okra, because I used some okra for a few years.
Ah.
What I would do is when I first started into it, I was working with green cover seeds, and when I was importing seed, I would say throw 5 bags of okra in. Let's throw 5 bags of, just to put it in, just to see what would happen when we start growing it in Western Canada. And my line that I use is, we only learn by doing. And once again, we throw some okra in. What does it do? Well, it didn't maybe work on my farm in my situation, but under these situations, it's going to work. We're going to need it. So these are the things where 23 species in. No, I don't want this in it. Let's put it in just in case. What does it cost? And that's, once again, when you can break it out and it's $6 per hectare. Well, you're going to spend more money on other things than $6 on something that maybe isn't going to work this year. But that year that it does work, boom, it's paid for itself over and over again.
It's not even across the whole farm. I mean, we've had plots where we've been time poor, so we've been from one paddock to the next, and we've given it a week. It's a week difference, and you can have a massive difference in what comes up just within that week or 2 weeks, or slightly different history of the paddock. Especially it's not the whole farm. So just putting all your eggs in that one basket with monoculture, that mentality is scary for a lot of people. So it's risk management, really. I see this as.
Well, absolutely, and that's where pick on Paul again. I put in a little bit of Japanese millet, Shoshone. No, not Shoshone. Millet. Anyways, and he phoned me up in July and he said, no more Japanese millet in the mix. It's not doing anything. We waited a month and he phoned me back and he said, how much more in this Japanese millet can we put in? Because the oats stopped growing and the Japanese millet kept on going. He said, that's where, and once again, on the hills, not so much, but in the spots where there's a little more moisture, it just absolutely exploded. And so that, 1 kilo per hectare or 2 kilos per hectare, what does it do at a cost? Nothing. What does it do for insurance? Huge.
I'm so pleased you brought this up, Tim, because I'd actually forgotten. I have actually got some of my own slides when I did my experiments. This was AGF seeds bought from Kandanga Farm Store. And so this was I had 3 stages. This was my first stage. So the sunflowers came up and the sorghum, and the sunflowers went to seed. Or sorry, they bloomed before anything else did, and then the sorghum, and then my second stage was the sun hemp was coming through, and I think it was cowpea. I get a bit confused between cowpea and lab, but I think they were both in there. And then I'm calling this lab, but you guys might correct me. It had white flour and it had like a round pea shell, like a, what do you call it? Like a, so that's lab. And so then it was basically like a monoculture. So it had gone from a mixed species altogether to these 3 stages of, and this was the last one, which was ended up being a monoculture. And so what did I do with it? I thought my horses loved it, but this is in my garden area, so I couldn't actually just allow them to eat it. So what I did is I cut it all, let the chickens all just scratch around, and then I planted blueberry in. But my issue is bush turkeys and chickens, no matter what I plant, they always dig it up. So what I did was, with all of that residue left over, I stuck it all back on, and so it's all still alive now, and the chickens weren't actually able to scratch it. So everything on the right there on the grass, I put it onto the garden bed.
I thought you were going to say put the cat in there to get rid of the chickens.
No, she protects them. She's like a Marima dog. She's my chicken cat. Every now and again she does chase them, I have to say, because she is a cat. She has to prove that. So I really, when I went from stage, and this is just really thinking outside the box for any farmer that's like, oh, well, I can't do the multi-species for whatever reason. I looked at this hedge and I went, what am I going to do with it? Because I want to plant food. And so I ended up turning all of those vines into a prevention of my chickens, to protection basically for my plants.
Well, that's where one of the producers, Kim Nielsen, he's north of Ballarat a couple hours, and he was concerned about when he was grazing, some of the grass is becoming too lignified and the feed fell was going to drop. So he went in and he was doing what we call swath grazing. So went out, slashed it, put them into a swath, and then that stored on the soil surface, kept that in a good feed state, and everything else regrew around it. And then when he put the animals out, away they went, and they did fantastic.
Yeah, and utilising what you've got is a pretty much. We have a lot of areas in northern Australia got prickly acacia and those sort of prickle bushes, and I've got one customer who goes around and throws seed into the middle of them. That's his protection mechanism. And when he can get legume, especially leguminous trees like Leucaena and whatever growing in amongst prickle bush, you can't get it established anywhere else because either wildlife or domestic animals smash it. So lantana, I mean, if you can throw seed in amongst lantana and start utilising that, that's pretty. The picture in my background here, that's pretty much what that is. It's a heap of weeds, and then they've had all legumes grow up over the top of it. That girl is not a dwarf. She's a normal height person, but you've got 3 to 4 meter high, density of stuff, and that had only been grazed 3 months prior, so it's not all stuff that's been sitting there for years. But yeah, you get animals in there, they will walk over, smash, incorporate all that stuff to trying to get to that legume and that beautiful variety of feed, and which creates a depth of flavour in the meat. But really, it's utilising, instead of fighting against nature, it's utilising it and working with her, and maybe adding a little bit here and there around the edges to see what she can come up with.
My question there, Tim, was how did you get the fence through there?
That took her 2 days to do 200 metres of fencing. Bloody Kiwi Tech kept, that's this type of village. Anyway, it just gets consumed by legume, and it was a nightmare.
So was she brush cutting underneath it?
Yeah, brush cutting through it, trying to get, but we gave up after 200 metres and said, well, they might have to have a bit bigger paddock.
Yeah, well, that's it. Let them trample it first and then put the fence in.
Well, that property is actually going to all virtual fencing now, so that'll deal with that issue.
Easy.
But like when you talk to people who don't understand this subtropical, once it hits spring and summer, once we've had that first flush of rain, just the growth rate is immense, isn't it, Tim?
Yeah, and it can all, there's a you get taught to try and match stocking rate to carrying capacity. You can't. It's just impossible. But you've got to remember there's a biological stocking rate too. There's the worms that Neil spoke about earlier, and the bees that we saw a picture of before, and the amount of little birds and bugs and beetles. You don't have to, turn everything into a piece of meat or a piece of grain that you got to, there's this giving back to the soil, you can monetarily benefit from that in terms of carbon projects or the natural capital projects. But I think just having extra, it's not bad to have extra. And you get to a drought and you're looking for the extra, don't worry.
Okay, we've hit like an hour and 10. I know that we've really sort of focused a fair bit on the grazing side because obviously Kevin's forte is the seed production and cropping, but he has also integrated livestock as well into his farm once upon a time, which we have discussed before. But yeah, I mean, maybe at some stage, well, definitely for the Broadacre down in Mornington Peninsula conference, Kevin will be specifically turning his presentation into the seed and grain production in Creswick, but near Ballarat it will be integrating livestock, mixed species, everything into farming production. Mudgee is also about integrating livestock, but talking about orchards and market gardens and vineyards. And then the Gold Coast, I'm working backwards, sorry to confuse everybody. The Gold Coast, which is where we're going to start, is sort of a multifaceted, diverse way of looking at farming. So we've got on farm, it will be hay, from haymaking to syntropics and everything else in between, and with business models as well. So that's the 4 conferences. Neils, I'm pretty sure, will be at the Mornington Peninsula one.
There, yep.
Because Phil and Hamish will be talking, and Tim and Amber will hopefully they are invited to a conference. So you can take your pick, Tim. and then Kevin will be at every one, and so will I. Thank goodness, because we're organising and running it. I might just do a runner at the last minute. Is there anything anybody else would like to add? Thank you so much for coming. No, you're all good?
Yep.
Fantastic. We've
Nice
had
to be in such esteemed company.
That's right. And thank you to everybody. So thank you, Niels from the Gippsland area. Thank you, Tim from Gympie, and thank you, Kevin from Alberta. Had a wonderful discussion today. See you all in 2 weeks.